This past Monday was Memorial Day, so I want to do three things today. First, I want to talk a little bit about the history of Memorial Day. Second, I want to talk a bit about the wars in which Americans fought and died, and for which they are commemorated on Memorial Day. And the third thing I want to talk about is the significance of these wars, because there's a pattern here. So let's go ahead and start with the history of Memorial Day. I'm going to take this from the National Archives, and here we go. Memorial Day began as a way to honor those who died in the Civil War, and it has become a day to honor all American veterans who gave their lives in sacrifice to our nation. You can learn more about its history in the Pieces of History blog from the National Archives History Office. Memorial Day, initially referred to as Decoration Day, was observed by many communities after the Civil War, when the nation suffered more than 620,000 military deaths, or roughly 2% of the total population at the time. John A. Logan, the commander in chief of the Grand Army of the Republic, chose May 30th, 1868, as a day to decorate the graves of Union troops across the nation. From this beginning, Memorial Day is now designated as an annual day of remembrance to honor all those who have died in service to the United States during peace and war. Veterans Day, November 11th, celebrates the service of all U.S. military veterans. Okay, so let me talk a little bit about the losses of these various main wars, if you want to call them that. This comes from Statista, uh, a page called Number of Military Fatalities, meaning U.S. military fatalities, in all major wars involving the United States, 1775 through 2024. Okay, so the American Revolution, 25,000 fatalities, 25,000 dead soldiers, American. War of 1812, 20,000 dead American soldiers. Mexican American War, 13,283. Civil War, 620,000. The Indian Wars, it gets a little difficult here. Two sets of numbers. The one set of numbers goes from 1775 to about 1845, when Manifest Destiny was announced. And then the second set goes from about 1845 to 1890 until the closing of the frontier. Now, the numbers that are fairly relatively easy to find are those that deal with the 1845 or Phase 2, 1845 to 1890 or Phase 2 of the Indian Wars. That number is about 1,000 dead. 1,000 Americans died, American soldiers died in that war, or in those various wars. Now, from Phase 1, 1775 to 1845, which was the Indian Wars really to the east of the Mississippi River, it's been a little bit more difficult to calculate. The number I come up with is around 1,100, based on a variety of sources. We know St. Clair suffered a big defeat in 1791, where he lost 632 troops. The Battle of Tippecanoe, 1811, or 80 troops died in that one. Fallen Timbers was in 1794, dropping out of sequence here. About 33, 35 killed there. The Black Hawk War, around 35. And then you had the Cherokee and the Creek Wars that were in the South. Maybe at most another 200. So I estimate, it could be up to 1,000 to 1,100. For Phase 1 of the Indian Wars, and then Phase 2 is about another 1,000. Okay. Spanish American War. Fatalities, 2446, 2,446. World War I, American fatalities, 116,516. World War II, 405,399 American soldiers died. Korean War, as part of the Cold War, 36,516 U.S. soldiers died. Vietnam, 58,209 U.S. soldiers died. War on Terror from 2001 until 2024, according to Statista, 7,078 died. Okay. So, what's the significance of these wars? Were they just? Yes, they were. Every one of them was just. They were in self defense, or they were to establish or restore right order in the community of nations. They advanced or comported with principles of the law of nations, the ius gentium, the international law. They were done pursuant, they were fought pursuant to treaties or agreements which we honored. Those are the four main takeaways that I think we can readily accept and see from our just wars. Now, there's other aspects to consider here. All of this indicates that America recognized the existence of community nations, and a community of nations would in turn affect or govern our actions. Now, previously I've written and I've talked about how in the intellectual DNA of America is this idea of law of nations, because the founders read Aimé de Vattel's Law of Nations. They got the Law of Nations in the Constitution. And this affected how the founders thought and how all succeeding generations thought and felt. Because we were coming onto the scene as a new nation, and we were a member now of the community of nations. We were a member of a community, and we wanted to play by the rules, and we wanted to make sure that there was peace and that there was good for all the countries, all the nations in this community of nations. I think we can also conclude that America has acted as the model citizen in the community of nations. We're an example for all countries how you should act. Something that I will touch on in another video in greater depth is that I believe that America serves as a model for an organization of the community of nations, or for the global community, if you will. It provides a roadmap for right ordering the world community, which consists of many countries and peoples. A couple of our key principles, of course, are federalism and liberalism, which are rightly understood and limited, and rightly oriented to the person in accordance with the ius gentium and the law of nations. The United Nations, I think, is an example of what I just said. It is a U.S. based creation. It's based on four pillars, the essence of which are the essence of right ordering under ius gentium. And those four pillars are peace, development, human rights, and the rule of law. And at the heart of right ordering of societies and also of the community of nations or the world is the importance of and respect of the person. And this is set forth in the Law of Nations and the ius gentium. And so that is a topic which I think can be developed more later on, but I want to raise it right now because we need to keep it in mind as we go through the days. So let's examine the wars in light of the principles of the natural law or the ius gentium. Uh, you know, um, I'm going to a lot of my references to the works of John Epstein. I've quoted him before. He's in my various writings and my other talks. Especially, I'm going to reference Code of International Ethics, which came out in 1953. That was written by what I call the Mechelin Group or the Malines Group. It was under the auspices of the Catholic bishop. The people who put it out, the actual group that put it out, or compiled it, I should say, is the International Union of Social Studies. There was a 35 version, and I'm going off the 1953 version. It's never been updated. And I think ultimately at some point, the principles that are in there are very valid, and we need to recognize them. And they have stood the test of time. So let's take a look at the American Revolution. It was a war of national self-determination. We were being destroyed by the British. Our fundamental rights were being harmed. We couldn't print money or coin money. Very, very limited in manufacturing. Actually, I don't think we do any manufacturing. The Tea Act destroyed American industry and business. What the Tea Act said is it said we'll lower the price of tea if you buy from the East India Company, but all your middlemen are going to go away. And so what that meant to the Americans, rightly so, is that hey, the British are deciding to do away with this industry, the tea industry, with the stroke of a pen in Parliament and with the approval of the King, and they could do this to any one of our other industries. So this was really a very frightening event to our founders, and rightly so, because it did away with industry for arbitrary and capricious reasons, basically to bail out one big company that many of the plutocrats in England had money in, and they didn't want it to go under. Our trade was restricted, our expansion was restricted, and so that impinged on this doctrine of providential destination, which is developing the lands and the resources of the lands for the benefit of all people. As a quick segue here, I've edited and revised a previous piece I did, and I put it up on the website. This land belongs to you and me, because I wanted to boil down the concepts a little clearer. But it talks about this idea of providential destination and using lands, properly to benefit all of humanity. And in that case, the general principle, the benefit of humanity, overrides the specific, which may be, the preferences of a certain group or people or country. Okay, the British were also stifling or burdening our innovation. They were restricting our innovation. They had a number of arbitrary rulings. There were defects in the governing institutions that I've also spoken about, and you can see it on the website from last September. And we just didn't know who had the power and what power there was, and what we could do and what we couldn't do. We were a separate people. And there was all indication, as Charles Beard says, that there were about 10,000 Britishers or Englishmen who were landed aristocracy who ruled the empire. And so they wanted to shift the costs away from themselves so they could make the profits. And they were very agrarian, so they limited innovation by what they did. And the American founders understood that. And that's why you can see in the Constitution the importance of intellectual property. And America came on the scene at the time when industry was coming on the scene, and the importance of commerce was being realized anew. And so, with trade restricted, manufacturing restricted, innovation restricted, America could not develop. So our development was being hindered. We were being crushed. And so our war for national self-determination was, in fact, to reaffirm the principles of the law of nations, the ius gentium, and of the natural law. Okay, the War of 1812. That was a defense of freedom or navigation. I'm sorry, freedom of navigation or freedom of the seas. Well, that's a very fundamental principle. It goes back to the time of Justinian. And we see the Houthis have attacked shipping in the Red Sea and around the Bab el-Mandab. And so that is an interference with navigation or freedom of the seas. That's a violation of international law, of the ius gentium, of the law of nations. War of 1812 is also a war of self-defense. In particular, the British had broken a number of treaties after the American Revolution to get the heck out of the Northwest Territory, to stop stoking the fires of Indian wars against our country. And the British just never quite stopped doing that, even after the Battle of Fallen Timbers in 1784. They just kept agitating the Indians to attack us. Well, that was a violation of the Treaty of Paris of 1783, and that is immoral. Like Russia, like Putin has invaded Ukraine against a number of treaties to include the UN Charter. That is illegal and immoral. And what the British did was illegal and immoral. So the War of 1812 was to reestablish the importance of treaties and a right order of the world based on treaties where your word is your bond, is to reestablish this fundamental principle of freedom or navigation, freedom of navigation or freedom of the seas. Okay, now we get into the Indian Wars, which, 1775 to about 1890. What were they? They were self-defense. We had a number of situations where treaties were broken by the Indians, and so the treaties had to be repaired. There was a big issue of providential destination, the right use of the land, and this is what I wrote about in my piece, This Land Belongs to You and Me, especially when it comes to Indiana, which is where I'm living, and Indiana, where Notre Dame is, and where the Catholic Church has somewhat of an imprint and had an impact. And what you had in the 1820s and 1830s were a number of treaties with the various Indian tribes here, by which the Indians were given money and tools and the chances for development to learn and improve themselves. And these were the subject of a number of treaties. In return, they gave the land which we developed and made it more prosperous, more beneficial, providential destination again. And at the same time, development of peoples. So the Indians got rid of their old ways, which were not very productive because they weren't really able to maintain large families, and they had a lot of other problems. They just let a lot of land go to waste as they ran around and hunted. And so they were able to develop themselves, and they were able to develop the land through the programs that Presidents Monroe and Jackson and Adams put into effect. So the Mexican-American War. Okay, so what happened there? Well, we tried to negotiate a border dispute. We had people in Mexico City, but the dictator didn't want to talk to them. And then Mexico attacked us. And then, so it was a self-defense. We ended up paying for the land that we claimed, that we took, pursuant to a treaty. And once again, we see the example of providential destination, using this land more productively than some dictator in Mexico City was going to use it. And we also see this idea of the importance of complying with treaties, making treaties, living by treaties, making sure we can get peaceful resolution of disputes. The Civil War, well, that was an unjust rebellion by people in the South or the Confederate States of America. They could have had their issues resolved in courts. They didn't. But there were other issues. You had really a tyrannical regime in the South that oppressed in large measure the slaves, and then what this war then became was an opportunity for the development of the various peoples. The Southerners themselves were very limited in what they did in the South. There was a lot more they could have done. And then that also implicates the whole idea of providential destination. So it was really an improvement of all the peoples. Eventually, it was a bloody war, a horrible war. Civil wars oftentimes are. The Spanish-American War, the U.S. was attacked. Again, self-defense. We have the right to protect the people who are subjected to the tyranny by the Spanish crown, and we paid the Spanish for the Philippines. A lot of people, and even more, a lot of people forget this. We don't just take stuff; we actually paid them. So what happened then is America increasingly pushed the idea of peaceful resolution of disputes, and this was in the 1890s and the early 20th century. And the Hague conferences were begun at the bequest of the Tsar of Russia at the time. But the Americans carried on with the importance of peace and resolving things peaceably. So World War One, what happened there? We were, it was a matter of self-defense again. We were defending freedom of navigation, freedom of the seas. We sought a peaceful right order. We were trying to correct the disorder caused by the Kaiser and by others in Germany. Wilson came up with this 14-point plan, called for transparency, a League of Nations, which is a juridical manifestation, albeit not very good, of as time would tell, of the community of nations, but it recognized that there's a community and it recognized the importance that we have to work together. All the other European attempts up to that time had failed. League of Nations would ultimately fail too. But it was to be replaced by the United Nations, which has worked remarkably well for a very long time. We didn't fight for land or power. We didn't fight for glory. And that was the driving force of a lot of the Christian European countries or the European countries. This is what they fought for all throughout the 19th century, and that's what fueled the First World War, a horrible war, which I've written about also too on the website. Okay, World War II, we were attacked, and I think what we were dealing with in World War II was this grave disorder of the world community caused by tyrants who broke treaties, who waged aggressive war, who violated human rights, and who were really not interested in the person. Again, we see this theme of the importance of the person. Bring peace, bring right order. This is what America has always done. Bring peace, bring right order, implement the principles of the law of nations, and let us focus on the person in order to do that. So that's why you had the United Nations after the war. And what you had then are, of course, the four pillars: peace, okay, which we have always thought of as the normal way of doing things, rule of law, development, and human rights. We've also had a very heavy emphasis on commercial transactions, on doing business to help bring the peace, and that has helped us in many ways. But the four pillars of the UN, peace, rule of law, development, human rights, are four pillars, four elements that focus on the person, that basically implement gentium, the law of nations, in a realistic and true manner to allow the protection, the right development of the person and all that he and she is. The four freedoms too, that's speech, freedom to speak, freedom from want, freedom to worship, freedom from fear, were also four very important principles about this idea of the centrality of the person and how the person has got to be the object of what is being done by the governments, by the community of nations, and that is all done in accordance with the law of nations, the principles of the law of nations. So what do we have with the Cold War? Well, really we have the UN playing a really big role. And the UN, as a juridical manifestation of of the community of nations, came about because of America, because of the United States. And you can read Cordell Hull's memoirs, which I've read, and he talks about all the work he put into this and the troubles he had from the Soviet Union. They were the biggest problem in this whole thing. They were trying to game the system. But eventually, they bought on for what we have. But now, of course, they're rejecting it. They're repudiating it because Putin and the Russians don't care about the person. That is not important. But the recognition of the importance of the person, the dignity of the person, is important for right ordering societies, both domestically and internationally, and for allowing there to be these things like peace, development, human rights, rule of law, and fulfilling the object, the purpose of the gentium. Okay, or the law of nations. Okay, so we're working with the UN a lot in the Cold War, and you really have to look at a lot of the instances where the UN really had something to say and do that was very important, and there were a lot. I mean, with every hot spot in the world, the UN Security Council or the UN General Assembly weighed in and said something. Okay, so let's take a look at Korea. Once again, that was a UN operation, and that was to stop the aggression of the communists of North Korea, which communists of North Korea were helped by the Chinese communists. Okay, and that attack was aggression. It was against international law, and it resulted in a lot of suffering. And so America came in with the United Nations countries pursuant to a General Assembly resolution, and we defended South Korea, a sovereign and independent country whose sovereignty was being threatened. Again, sovereignty is a principle of the law of nations, a principle of the United Nations, which the United States has always upheld and has always fought to uphold. Ukraine is a sovereign country, sovereign nation. It is a member of the United Nations. Its borders are important. They're sacrosanct. That's why the United States has supported Ukraine. And if we don't support Ukraine, that's a bad thing. That is a repudiation, or that is a neglect of these very important principles of the law of nations. So, Korea was an example of dealing with communist aggression, the UN coming together, and the United States fighting a war pursuant to UN General Assembly resolution. Vietnam was a situation where you had a country that was recognized by at least 80 other countries, the Republic of Vietnam, which was fighting subversion, internal subversion, an invasion from the north, from a foreign enemy. So you had violations of international law, law of nations, right there with this aggression by the north, and with the human rights abuses that the communists inflicted all throughout South Vietnam. And we came in as a result with a lot of other countries. We came in at the request of the South Vietnamese to fight this aggression, to fight this attack, this aggression, this violation of international law and the law of nations by the communists. And there are many other places where that was the case. But what I want to talk about too is what we dealt with during the Cold War is also applicable. It's applicable to today because we are in a world war right now. We're in a World War V, is what I call it. It's a world war with Russia and with China and with a couple of other dictatorships. But these principles are very important that I want to talk to you about, because these principles basically say that countries have a right and a duty to defend themselves from subversion of foreign powers or alien ideologies that are very destructive of the person. And so what I want to do is I want to reference Epstein from Code of International Ethics, pages 25 and 26, and then section 47. Okay, so this is what he writes. Excuse me. And again, this book was written by some of the best and brightest people in the world, in the Catholic Church, and was approved, by a bishop. And this is a very highly regarded book. So Epstein writes, quote, "The presence in the world of this militant antisocial element," meaning communism, "committed to the total aggression against society which we have described, how is this challenge to be met? The practical steps to be taken belong to the spheres of politics and strategy, but the principles concerned are sufficiently clear from our tradition. The authors of this code, Article 47 of the Code of International Ethics, have no doubt that faced with this new technique of aggression by penetration, okay, aggression by penetration as opposed to aggression by, kinetics, which we were all used to, which is, World War II, Hitler going across the borders. Faced with this new technique of aggression by penetration, a state has the right to defend itself by every appropriate means, and that other states ought, if they are able, to come to its aid." Okay? So this was Vietnam. South Vietnam, the Republic of Vietnam, was being infiltrated, being attacked by subversion, by penetration of aggression by the communists. And the other states of the world, the other nations of the world, came to its assistance. This quote on page 25-26 goes on. "But that is only a negative and piecemeal approach to the problem. I would rather pose the problem thus. Here are the majority of states committed to fulfilling their right and natural duty of bringing into being a positive organization of international society. Until this total attack upon the foundations of society is faced and overcome as a whole, there is no prospect whatever of attaining that good end. The resources of the associated states must therefore be collectively applied to a complete social process designed to overcome the attack." So not only was it a military response that was needed, but also too, it's social. It's the whole thing because the attack is full spectrum. Okay, so he references Article 47, and he talks about Article 47, and then after I talk about Article 47, I want to give you the main takeaways. Quote, the unjust aggression against which a state is entitled to defend itself need not necessarily take the form of an unprovoked military attack. Very important, especially today as we are being attacked by Russian disinformation. Very important. Only too often in the course of history have governments urged by ambitions of conquest which they do not avow, interfered unduly in the internal affairs of another state in order to carry out in its midst the policy of divide et impera, or divide and conquer. So what he's talking about there is sometimes instead of using military action, countries like Russia use disinformation to divide countries, which is what they're trying to do here and in the countries of Europe, even as I speak. Such actions or aims at overthrowing and destroying the social cohesion of the state, which is the victim or the target of it, and to weaken its means of resistance so as to reduce it to servitude without the use of force or with the minimum of military compulsion. So the action or the aims is to destroy the social cohesion of the state or to weaken its means of resistance so as to reduce it to servitude without the use of force or with the minimum of military compulsion. This is what the communists did during the Cold War. This is what the Russians are doing right now during World War V with their disinformation. And so I've got another paragraph to go, but this sets forth the morality of our recognizing and resisting and defeating Russian aggression in the form of aggression by penetration, which is disinformation. These insidious tactics assume the most varied forms at the present time. The intrigues of a fifth column, I got a bad printing here. The intrigues of a fifth column, disruptive propaganda, the struggle of factions, or class war, all these processes aim insidiously at undermining patriotism and substituting for the loyalty due to the legitimate authority of the state blind adherence to an ideology. Could be communism, could be international nationalism, of which the leaders to the aggressor state set themselves up to their own exclusive profit as the sole authoritative exponents. Against this modern method of aggressive imperialism, every state has the right to defend its integrity and its independence. It may in particular prescribe all seditious and disruptive propaganda, or it may outlaw any organizations or factions which pursue objects incompatible with the loyalty due to the state, especially if they take their orders from a foreign power. End of quote. Okay, so what do we take away from that? The state can defend against subversion of the state or society. This principle of defense is well established. It's been around a long time. 3, we have a duty to help others who call for it. Indeed, we have a duty, we have a duty to help others who call for it. Number 4, we have a right to take measures to stop the spread of these subversive ideologies and attacks. And 5th, it is possible that global wars can be ideological, that we may have to fight an ideological war with an enemy like Russia. Okay, global war on terror, what was that about? Fighting terrorism in accordance with the UN Charter and UN resolutions and General Assembly resolutions and Security Council resolutions. You had rogue states and non-state actors against the world community and against right world order, just like communism during the Cold War. Against terrorism, you had United Nations Security Council resolutions. These are 2. There were many more. 1373 and 1378, which all the countries of the world joined in to fight terror. You had particular resolutions from the General Assembly and I think also from the Security Council on Syria, Libya, and Afghanistan. So then that means that the community of nations can act in accordance with that. America did. Um, and so here we have the rule of law, everybody working together to restore right order, an essential part of this idea of a community of nations, and an essential understanding that is needed before you can really implement the ius gentium, this idea of benefiting the person, with peace, development, rule of law, and human rights. Uh, and then there were, like I said, particular resolutions in regard to Syria, Libya, Afghanistan. Iraq had certain resolutions going back to the first Gulf War. Off the top of my head, they were 687, 1441, and then 1483, which dealt with the occupation of Iraq. Okay, so now we're involved in, and the countries complied with these various resolutions. That was the sense of the world, and they agreed with them and complied. And so that means you're acting morally. Okay, so now World War V, a defensive war against is really a defensive war against the Russians at this point, and I think ultimately the Chinese. Putin is pushing international nationalism as a political movement, taking advantage of our systems, our processes, our freedoms to impose a tyranny, to destroy the idea of the centrality of the person. And I think Epstein's code of international ethics applies, what I've told you, and what is essential here. The world order is definitely under attack. It is a beneficial world order, and it's under attack. It is being attacked by lies, being attacked with disinformation, being attacked with a lot of different things, splitting societies, just like we saw in the Cold War, just like Epstein described in the Code of Ethics that I read to you earlier. Um, in some, America is the model member of the community of nations because we put the person as central to right order. We've always acted in accordance with the law of nations and what we've done, or the principles of it, the natural law. We've worked to make it stronger, to build up the juridical structures of this community of nations, which we recognized early on. And so we have things like rule of law, peace, development, and human rights that are so important, and that Russia and other tyrannies and dictatorships want to do away with. They don't want the rule of law. They don't want human rights. They want development for them, and they want peace when it serves their purposes. But America says no. Applies all the time and everywhere. The person is central to right order of societies, both domestic and international. And St. John the 23rd said that in Pacem in Terris. That's all I got. Thank you.